Good morning, guys, and welcome back to the Celtic Way morning briefing. It is Friday, the 14th of June. It's the first day of the Euros. It's also the first proper day of the transfer window, and Celtic still don't have a head of recruitment signed up. That is the article that is on. Tony's doing all the prompts for me. But yeah, that is the state of play at this moment in time. But it's part two. If you joined us for part one yesterday, you would have known that we were talking about the goalkeeper and the defence. So today it's all about the midfield and the forward line. There's going to be plenty of topics and plenty of spicy debate, I presume, especially in the forward areas today. My name is Ryan McGinley. Today I'm delighted to be joined once again by Tony Haggerty and Joe Donnelly. Guys, how you doing? First of all, Tony, how are you doing?
Great. Euros is starting. Some football fix for the next few weeks. Great. But it's not Celtic, is it? But hey, it's a daily football fix. I can live with that. Yes, no head of recruitment. Transfer window's open, so here's hoping that might have some good news at the weekend. Feeling that hopefully things take a forward step in the next few days or so.
Absolutely. Joe, how you doing?
Yeah, good. Similar to Tony, it's not quite Celtic, but I'm a real sucker for the 3 games a day. I watch any football that's on the TV. And like we said yesterday, want the Scotland boys to do well, want the Celtic Scotland boys to do especially well and avoid injury. That will make me happy for the next fortnight or so.
Yep, absolutely. 4 representatives for Celtic: Greg Taylor, Tony Ralston, James Forrest, and of course the captain, Callum McGregor. Before we get started and talk about the deconstructing the whole team, we've got exciting news from our sponsors, MPH Group, and they have opened a brand new kitchen showroom in Dunfermline, Fife, with a VIP Vegas-themed launch weekend, which happens today from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m, and that runs until the 16th, which is Sunday. There will be roulette games with an instant win prizes like 10% off services, free boiler services, and a chance to enter a draw for bigger prizes, land on zero, and get entered into a grand draw for a 4-night stay in Las Vegas with a helicopter tour. Don't miss out. RSVP now at www.launch.mph.group to secure your spot. See you there. And there's also a video on the Celtic Way Facebook page that shows you exactly all the details in that as well. So have a wee look out for that. I'll post it again later on today for anyone that's not seen it, and we thank them and we wish them all the best with their new showroom. Also, if you look at the bottom of the screen, £4 for 4 months, www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe. On there this morning, I thought I would write it yesterday. It was a bit of a spur of the moment thing. I was writing about the fact that it's been 104 days since Mark Lawwell and Joe Dudgeon announced their collective departure from Celtic at the end of the season. 104 days on and still no replacement. I think that's something that we could probably even talk about today as well. That seems to be doing a good numbers today, so it's good that it's resonated with people. I think people just want to see a head of recruitment at the end of the day. So yeah, check that out, www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe, and please subscribe to the YouTube channel as well, completely free, and we want to keep on growing this ever-growing community, but we want to keep it growing to the next level, and then the next level after that. Let's get in and deconstructing this team, starting from the midfield. And I'm going to throw a bit of a curveball in the midfield, first of all, because you could talk about anybody. You could talk about Hatate, you could talk about O'Reilly, but I want to also talk about the curious case of Odin Thiago Holm, because now I remember he made his debut. I think it was against Ross County. He came off the bench and he really impressed everybody with his low centre of gravity, his ability to beat a man. It's been very few and far between. We've seen performances this season. He got that 1 goal against Bucky Thistle, which was a good finish. But, apart from that, he gets sent off at the keep against Feyenoord, and he's been very much in and out of the team. And in the second half of the season, out of the team, we've hardly seen him. Tony, what do you make of Odin Thiago Holm? Just his situation. I know he's a young guy trying to make his way in the game, but he's going to have a bigger impact next season if he's to make a prolonged impact at Celtic.
I think there's players that you would immediately put on loan, and there's others that you would persevere with, and others obviously put out at the exit door completely. The manager really likes this player. I think he spoke very highly of him, and when he did get sent off and to keep, there was no chastising of him. I think Brendan Rodgers really put the arm around him and said, "This is a young boy learning," and that was the ultimate school of hard knocks, European football. You just can't tackle like that. That whole giving the referee a decision to make. Well, don't be surprised if it goes against you. And I think the manager really said to him, look, in order to make a name for yourself here, and you will do that because you're a talented boy, but that's not the way to go about your business. And I really did think after that, Brendan Rodgers kind of took time to speak to him and nurture him and say, right, I think there's talent in here, but you need to listen, you need to learn, and you need to watch these guys repeatedly. You know, the likes of Callum McGregor, Hattati, Matt O'Reilly. And I would hope that this would be Odin Thiago Holm's breakout season, because he came with a decent enough pedigree for Norway and stayed in Norwegian football to amass over 100 odd games, which I thought was very bright of him, very astute, very intelligent of him. So now I'm hoping to see a bit more, because you look at him and you think there's the nub of something there, isn't there? You feel that if the sum of the parts could come together, that he could make a real contribution to Celtic. But I just think he was used sparingly because the manager was letting him bed in for a season and just say, look, learn, do me a favour and learn, watch these guys. And then because the manager, I think, he does value him very highly and he rates him very highly. So I would persevere with Odin Thiago Holm, because I think this is a season where he could be the guy who makes that impact, either coming off the bench or starting for an hour and doing stuff. So I'd like to see him, you know, have a full pre-season, and he's going to have that, and then see what he brings to the table after that. But I think we'd all be in agreement that there's something about Odin Thiago Holm that you would be loath to lose at this particular juncture. I could be wrong in that, but I'm willing to stick by that, and I'm quite confident that will be the case.
Yeah, before I bring you in, Joe, I totally agree with that, with everything that you said, Tony. I think there is a player there. It's just about nurturing that player and bringing them in and getting him more game time in the process. Before I get your thoughts on Odin Thiago Holm, I just want to bring up this comment. Robert Arbuckle is live at the Estadio Nacional. I can't think of a better place to watch the Celtic Way morning briefing than, you know, the place where Celtic's greatest ever day happened. You know, it's can't think of better surroundings. That, in fact, I don't think there is better surroundings apart from maybe being at Celtic Park. Even then, I think there'd be a bit of bias towards Lisbon and the Lisbon Lions. Joe, what do you make of Odin Thiago Holm? Because, you know, he had a couple of games where he was trusted to start because there was injuries to the midfield, and I thought he flattered to see if he didn't take his big chance when it came along. What's your thoughts on the talented Norwegian youngster?
Yeah, I mean, excuse me, I would definitely echo Tony's sentiments there about it feeling like there's a player there. I think that, as we spoke about yesterday, as we'll speak about over the course of this chat as well, if we're looking at who are Celtic bringing in, you know, if they get a director of football in there, if they get someone to kind of champion signings, that's all well and good. But like we speak all the time about those competition for places, if there are talents there to be nurtured, those guys need to come in. You and I spoke about Bosun Lawal and the prospect of him coming back into the first team last week, Ryan. And I think for me, Holm fits that billing. I think, I agree with Tony in terms of the red card in Europe being a real moment for the player to learn. And last season was a tough one for Brendan Rodgers in that, you know, there was some bumps in the road. He said himself, so of the players. It was a difficult time to bring in those players who might not be able to give you instant results. And I think Holm definitely reflects that. It was Holm, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was Holm that was kind of, some people were getting on his back, I saw on social media. He didn't refuse to lift the league trophy, but he passed it on to the next person simply. I mean, my reading of that, and I think most rational Celtic fans' reading of that, was he didn't feel like he contributed enough to the season in the sense of it was a bit of humbleness and a bit of humility, as opposed to him disregarding the celebrations. For me, as opposed to a negative, I thought that was brilliant. I thought for a young player to have that level of insight, to have that level of decorum in a situation where, you know, I think Brendan Rodgers and the team would be saying, no, you know, you've been playing your part behind the scenes, you are part of this squad, you should be lifting the trophy. But for him personally to think, assuming this is the case, you know, like, I've maybe not contributed enough, I thought that was great. And I think that bodes well as a player who maybe wants to be contributing more, obviously, and has more to come. You know, you couple that with everything that we've seen so far, and I think that there's a player there that understands the expectation, understands the culture, understands that he needs to contribute at Celtic. So I'm looking forward to him over the next several weeks. Pre-season feels like the perfect proving ground for him. You might get to the other end and feel differently, but, you know, there's a lot of big games for him to come and prove himself ahead.
I think out of all the things that happened with Odin Thiago Holm last season, that would have been the moment that Brendan Rodgers decided, right, you're for me.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't want good players, he wants good people as well. doesn't just want good players, he wants good people. And that to me smacks of someone like you, Joe. That's the way I read that too. That he's a good person. And he was disappointed in himself with his own contribution and felt that he didn't earn his stripes to touch that trophy or be a part of the wider celebrations. And I think, to me, that speaks volumes about the player himself. And I think if there's anybody who has a point to prove, it's probably Odin Thiago Holm. And the manager's probably thought, you know what, you'll do for me. None of this jumping about and grabbing it, having made, barely enough appearances to get a medal type thing, that kind of stuff. Really irks me when I see that with players, because I think to myself, what are you doing? I get that you're part of a squad and all that, but, I think he felt that he didn't make a valid enough contribution, and that's something he wants to rectify. And I go along with the manager always says that Celtic players go about their business with, as you say, humility and decorum, and that for me smacked of that too. And I was, when I saw the other way people were reading that, I was quite perplexed by it, to be honest.
Yeah, I was quite surprised as well. Yeah,
I just thought that kind of backlash that you got for that. So, but here's hoping, because I really do think there's a potential. I hate to use the word star, but I think there's a potential cracking player there. And I think he will have benefited from just listening to the knowledge and the wisdom of the manager, and then press the reset for players like himself and go again.
Yeah, so I'm just going through the midfield and having a wee look. I don't think we need to spend too long on James McCarthy. Unfortunately, that's just a transfer that's not worked out. He's only contracted for 1 more year. So I would say that there's going to be a mutual parting of the ways next summer if a resolution isn't already found. But, signed on the same day as Joe Hart on a 4-year deal, I thought if you can keep a player like James McCarthy fit and ready, and you can see some semblance of the player that was, especially at Everton, who was the all-action. Hamilton days, they were so far gone, but the Everton days, he was showing that he could do it in the top league. Just hasn't worked out for whatever reason. He's had moments, had that good pass in the League Cup, I believe, and he also played the pass on to Bernabei, which was a big goal from Giacomakis at McDermott Park. But, he's just not fancied, and he's not been fancied by 2 managers, so that probably tells you something. Elsewhere in that position, Cal McGregor's a no-brainer. He'll play most games next season. Hopefully can get a prolonged rest over the summer once the Euros are over. Best of luck to him tonight. Temoki Iwata is a player that was in and out of the squad last season, although towards the second half of the season, Brendan Rodgers started to rely on him, both in starting games and coming off the bench. Joe, has Brendan Rodgers found a player that he can rely upon to do a job for the last 20 minutes, half an hour, or if a player gets injured, he can start a game?
I think, you said it there about Iwata being used a lot more kind of towards the end of the season. And again, we spoke about this last time I was on as well. The way that Callum McGregor was reintroduced, I know you guys have spoken about this over the course of your discussions as well, but the way that Callum McGregor was reintroduced to the team last year was unorthodox, but I think over the course, especially when you reflect back, it was really smart. Like I've used the example before about when Scott Brown was fit, he was in the team. When he was unfit, he was out of the team. But the way that Callum McGregor was reintroduced, kind of, again, a staggered approach, allowed, 1, the player to be assimilated when it mattered, 2, a bit more of a rest for a player who is used so much because he is so dependable, and 3, it did let Iwata kind of show himself a little bit more. James McCarthy, as you said, it's just not worked out. It was interesting when I worked at the club, I did James McCarthy's interview for the Celtic View over the phone, and then later that day did Joe Hart's, and just the comparison between 2 players that came in at the same time and the contributions they made. I have said this before, but I'd love to see Bosun Lawal come into that position as someone who's support. I think that if we're realistically looking at what Celtic might spend over the course of a transfer window, especially when you've got someone like Callum McGregor in that spot, I would rather see someone like a Lawal come in and show us a bit more, show us what they're made of, why the hype is there, why people are talking about them. Players like Iwata, I think that he is a great deputiser for that position as well. But Callum McGregor is so consistent, not just with his play, not just with his performances, but his ability to stay fit. He went through what seemed like a really serious injury last year and still somehow didn't seem to affect his appearance tally at the end. He's went to the Euros and he's spoken so openly himself about how, the advice was, you're out for the end of the season. And he was like, nah, I'm just going to keep playing and be in there. So in terms of backup for that position, I would like to see us reinforce what we've got. I don't think we necessarily need to spend in that position.
Yeah, Tony, what do you make, especially of Bosun Lawal? I know we were talking about Iwata, but Bosun Lawal is a player that I think a lot of Celtic fans have been excited about for the past 3-4 years. We want to see it now. I think we want to see him make that breakthrough into the first team.
I think, like Ode and Thiago Home, I think both of them need to have a breakthrough season at Celtic. Well, they have to be getting vital minutes. They have to be making valid contributions. Is there an argument for sending Lawal out on loan again? I guess that'll be for the Celtic management team to decide. But, I just think I think they're both at a good age where they can now possibly be trusted to come in. And Bosun Lawal's played competitive football in England, so as much as he hasn't really played in Scotland much, he has had that season. And I know Fleetwood get relegated, but he was a standout player for them. So I think, like everything else, every Celtic supporter's intrigued by this one, aren't they? They want to see what he brings to the table. And, I would let the manager look at these two guys, like Odin Thiago Home and Bosun Lawal, in pre-season, and then see if he thinks they can be unleashed. James McCarthy just hasn't worked out. It's sad, a self-confessed fan of the club, and it happens. It happens, and sadly, what can you say about it? It's just been a real shame he's not been able to contribute, and nobody will be more disappointed about that than McCarthy himself. Tomoki Iwata, he's another one you keep, isn't he? You just feel there's vital contributions that he can make, whether starting in whatever role that Celtic designate him in. But he saw enough to think, yep, another who, after a full pre-season, might come back refreshed and give you something, So I think you have to look at, keeping him around. I wouldn't be interested in entertaining bids for Tomoki Iwata. I just think someone else. I think he's very competent and very efficient at what he does. That dirty work that goes unnoticed sometimes, and people think you're not doing anything. But he was relied upon, as you said, Ryan, towards the tail end of the season, wasn't he? And he was relied upon when Callum McGregor was out the side. So he's definitely got something. But yeah, that's the way I feel about those midfielders, to be honest.
Yeah, by all accounts, Tomoki Iwata is a very, very popular member of the dressing room too. Matt O'Reilly was talking about him, how down to earth he is and how much he works in the gym as well. I think he called him a tank.
You can't underestimate that, like having good people around the place. They lift others. It's like Joe's come on and lifted us too, hasn't he? Right? You know what I mean? So that kind of thing. You can't get enough good people around the place. No, but you know what I mean? I'm jesting there, but it's. I never used to understand what Gordon Strachan used to say. A good person. And I understand it more now. That they're good trainers. They lead by example. They do stuff. They lift others. Maybe their sense of humour is great when times when it's needed, and they're serious when obviously you put the game head on. But Gordon Strachan used to bang on about that a lot. Good people. You need good people, and I'm like, you just need good players. But I kind of expanded my palette as well. Good players are great, but if they're good people too, then there's all different ways that they can have an effect in the dressing room. So I learned something when Gordon Strachan spoke about that, and I'm glad I did, because I understand it now when managers talk about it's not just a product on the park, it's other things that they do to influence players inside a dressing room environment and a culture. So yeah, if that's the case, then I would keep Tomoki Iwata around, definitely.
I think we'll bypass Paulo Bernardo because he's not officially a Celtic player at this moment in time. He's a Benfica player. Celtic make the move absolutely brilliant. It's going to be a bit quiet on that, but I think they're playing the long game. Negotiations are ongoing between the player.
I think the only question you should ask then, sign him or not, I'd say yeah.
Yeah, me too. I think for continuity, Joe, I think it's important that continuity is kept. Why would you keep a player there for a whole year, bed him in, have him have big moments? Most of his big moments were against Rangers, admittedly, which is brilliant. There's no bigger fixture for Celtic. So I think it's a no-brainer that Celtic sign him for the right price in the summer.
Yeah, 100%. And if it's, the $6 million price tag, again, in the scheme of world football, it's not that much. It's a lot for Celtic to splash out, and the longer I sit with it, I still believe that he's worth that. If it's the 3.5 with 3 up front, which was getting touted a couple of weeks ago, whenever it was, he should sign yesterday if that's the case.
Absolutely. Now we'll probably go and talk about the big hitters. In fact, before we talk about the big hitters, get Daniel Kelly, whose contract I believe is up at the end of the year. It's one of those weird contracts, but it's up at the end of the year rather than in a few days' time. Similar to, remember, Ryan Christie's contract that he signed, where in the 21-22 season, where he started playing games and then Celtic sold him in that same window after the Rangers game, because he only had 4 or 5 months left of his deal. The fact that they got that money was actually quite impressive from the club. Daniel Kelly, Tony, I know you're a fan of Daniel Kelly. You just hoping that he signs a new deal and gets his long-term future sorted at Celtic?
I'm the wrong man to ask because I'm just biased because I know the family and I know the.
That's exactly why I asked you, Tony.
Correct. So yeah, I want him to stay. I'd love him to stay. I know there's been dispute over the contract signing and stuff like that. So we shall see what happens. But I'd be very sad to see another young talent leave. And Daniel Kelly came in and what a goal he scored against Dundee. I mean, took it brilliantly, and like everything else, you get excited by players who have come through the academy, don't you? You almost a will to see them do well. I mean, my will to see him that night. I mean, it was just quite emotional watching him that night do that. So I was kind of like, wow, what a moment. I was more happy for his family because I know what they've sacrificed for him and done, and I'm a good friend of his father and he's the boy's grandfather as well. So, so I was delighted at that. So I hope that situation gets resolved sooner rather than later, because I think it's a boy who's ready to knuckle down and play a part in Celtic's future moving forward. And he is the future of the club moving forward. If you can't see that, then why do we bring them through the academy if we're going to just let them go at the optimum time when they're bursting into the first team? And I think the manager might get his way on this one because the manager really, really rates him. And again, talking about that good person, he says he's a great trainer. His attitude to listening and learning is fantastic. And see, when you've got that at a young age, I think any manager would want to get their claws into you and shape you and mould you and make you into the player that you want to be and take you to where you want to go. So I'm just hopeful that this situation gets resolved, because I'd be very sad to see Daniel Kelly leave the club. I've seen enough to convince me that there's enough there that moving forward he can make a valid and vital contribution.
More importantly, Joe, so have Bayer Leverkusen. Apparently, they've seen enough to maybe offer him a contract down the line. So that should be enough for Celtic to offer the right money for Daniel Kelly's future services. Would I be right in saying, Joe?
Yeah, I hope so. I think that's it, isn't it? And again, I know that you've got personal ties, Tony. Obviously, that I don't. But I think for young players getting to that point in their career, and it's easy for us, and I do it myself as well. And you hear about a big club coming in, you think, oh, but Celtic, you spent your time here, and you get really quite romantic about it. Who was it? Liam Morrison went to Bayern a number of years ago, and I saw some backlash, from Celtic fans, kind of voicing just frustration, I suppose, that sort of touching upon what you said, Tony, about players coming through the ranks and then Celtic maybe not being able to agree for whatever reason. But the opportunity that grants a player, even if they're only there for a couple of years, to learn and be in that environment, I understand it. Do you know what I mean? I hope he stays. Just touching upon something you said there, Tony, about the sacrifices that families make. I just think as a quick tangent, I remember, again, I spoke before about having the privilege to have written James Forrest's book when I was working at the club, and I interviewed his mother and father and James as well about the kind of family context and his journey through Celtic. And he talks about, it's the kind of things you don't think about necessarily when you see the final product at the other end when they're playing professionally. And his mother and father living in Prestwick, taking him 2 and 3 times a week through to Glasgow to train at Celtic. And they mention that sacrifice, and the parents don't see it that way. They just see it as, doing what they can for their children. I had a conversation with Ryan Christie at one point about Charlie Christie's father, who was obviously on the books at Celtic, didn't have the impact even that Ryan did at Celtic. But he spoke very openly about the moments in his teens, 14, 15, 16, where it was getting really tough. It was getting really challenging in terms of making that grade. And Ryan spoke about him and his father maybe having arguments and not necessarily seeing eye to eye. And there was times where Ryan himself was like, is this worth it? And his father was very keen for him to persevere and keep going. And of course, when you make it as a professional footballer, Ryan's able to turn around and say, thank you for pushing me. And it must be very hard for parents. It must be very hard to get that balance. My oldest is, she's nearly 6, not quite at that stage yet, but to push them, to recognise the talent, to keep them going, but not push them too hard, not put them off, not force them to do something. And I just think, it's a real credit to these families that can see it in their children, Daniel Kelly especially, that, they keep them going, they keep encouraging them, they sacrifice a lot for themselves. And that feels like, without over-romanticising, that feels like a real Celtic trait, doesn't it? A real family background pushing them. And I'd love to see them stay, not just off the back of that, but I think it's, as people that comment on the game or as fans who watch the game, we don't always think about that broad picture and what goes on to get them to that point.
Yeah, it's definitely the sacrifices, and those people have got to be applauded as well, because they've allowed for these talents to be nurtured.
Sure.
Yeah.
I look at myself, Matt. I never drove till I was 27. My father took me to every game that I wrote about until I was 27.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just crazy. You know what I mean? It's like, wow, most people learn to drive when they're 17, 18. That was a full decade of covering football matches. My father was my chauffeur, so...
It's all relative, isn't it? That's the thing.
It's a similar scale, so it's like, so you are grateful to that for those kind of things, and I guess it just kind of makes you the grounded person you are at times, doesn't it? Or it should do.
Before I go on and talk about the other midfielders and then the forwards, are you both okay to stay on until we talk about the whole team? Just I thought part 1 and part 2. I didn't want to run on to part 3 on Monday next week. So there's also some loan players that have been out that have been out on loan, trying to develop their careers elsewhere. The likes of Kwon, Hyuk-Kyu, Marco Tilio, who we'll probably talk about when it comes to the wingers, Bernabe, defender, who's been out on loan, Mikey Johnson on loan too. I think in terms of the midfielders, it's only Kwon that we need to talk about before we talk about Matt O'Reilly and Rio Hatate, the two big hitters in the squad. For Kwon, do you think another loan deal would suit him? Maybe to go back to St Mirren for another season? I know they've got European football, so that would be probably a good tester of where he is in his career. It's by all accounts, he did well in his time, his short spell at St Mirren. Injuries curtailed him at the end, but they were quite keen on him. So maybe he doesn't have a long-term future at Celtic, but in terms of progressing his career elsewhere, I think St Mirren maybe be a good move for him, Tony.
Yeah, I think he's one that you want to see. You would like to see him go out and see if he can replicate what he did at St Mirren. I just don't think he's first team ready for Celtic at the minute. I think the manager thinks that there might be something there, but he needs to be convinced completely, because if he can't do it again, then I would see a part of the ways with Kwon. I've got to be honest, I've not seen enough to say I would put him in a team where I could trust him. So I would like to see him go to somewhere like St Mirren, or at least a Scottish Premiership club, and get used to everything, all the grounds that he's going to play at. And if he does come back and have something to add to the table. But I'm just not convinced with Kwon at this moment in time, at this junction. I don't think the management team are either.
Yeah, Joe, you get anything to add on?
Nah, I think that's it. I've not seen enough of him. I did what I could to watch him in the early stages at St Mirren. I believe, again, I know he was injured, but he kind of dropped out even when he was fit. More appearances on the bench towards the end before he got injured. It's these guys that you want them to come back and force decisions. Liam Scales, perfect example in more recent times. So maybe another loan deal is the path to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Keanu Bacchus that came back into the squad, and he sort of went on the bench and then he got injured, which curtailed his loan spell. Matt O'Reilly and Rio Hatate, I think these are two names that you're going to hear a lot of this summer. Maybe not for the best headlines in terms of Celtic's team.
Not good enough for Celtic.
I think we'll say that if they get sold, that they're not good enough and Celtic have upgraded. That's a different story in itself. But I want to talk more about, because I think we always speak about Matt O'Reilly, and I know there's been renewed links to Atletico Madrid this morning coming from Spanish media. They're clearly keen on Matt O'Reilly. I think the links would have been even bigger if he'd have went to the Euros with Denmark. Still mystifies me as to why he isn't going to the Euros, but that's a discussion for maybe even over the Euros. For Rio Hatate, I think it's an interesting one because he did make grumblings that he wanted to try a new challenge this time last summer when he was in Japan with the Japanese media. He then went and signed a new 5-year deal. Now, Matt O'Reilly's was a 4-year deal. Rio Tati's was a 5-year deal, which means he'll be on good wages. He stayed in the team from when he came back from injury against, I think it was Livingston, he came back against, or around about that point. From then till the end of the season, he started every game for the club. Do you think that, guys, this is an open question to either of you, do you think that he will stay next season, or could you see that being the sort of surprise sale in Celtic's position where he maybe asks for a move, he's made that commitment, he's signed the new deal, which means that Celtic will get good money for him? Or do you see him staying just due to the fact that injuries curtailed him last season and he needs to put himself back in the shop window by having a good season at the club?
On you go, Joe.
I think it's a strange one for me. I'm gonna give an answer without actually answering anything here. I think, and I'm going to compare him to Matt O'Reilly because they're the two big ones, you know, in terms of who might go in the summer, aren't they? Like, Matt O'Reilly has really impressed me with the openness in which he's spoken about, you know, and the honesty. You know, it seems like front facing, everything's been on the table. You know, he was interested, or the interest that was shown in January. You know, he was quite humbled by it, but he had a word with the manager, everything that's made it into the public sphere, and he decided to stay. So if he goes, I don't think there's going to be any ill will because of what he contributed last year. I don't know that there'll be ill will with Hatate, but it's one of those ones. If he stays, brilliant. I love him as a player at Celtic, and I think I'll be really happy with that. If it turns out that he's asked for a transfer request, I won't be surprised. It just feels like one of those kind of players, and maybe that's because we haven't seen as much of him in a front-facing spotlight or whatever. But yeah, either way, I won't be shocked if that. It doesn't even. I don't even know if that makes sense. But I could see him being in the connection. But equally, if he goes, I still feel it's a position that we could replace more easily than O'Reilly. Yeah, again, an answer without actually really answering anything.
Tony, he's a player that, as much as we think he's a young player, or maybe we treat him as if he's a younger player, he's 26 years old. I think he's turned 27 at the end of this year. He's a young 27-year-old, given the amount of game time that he's had. I know injuries have played a part. Also going to university and getting a degree has played a part in that. He didn't make his professional debut until he was, 21 years old. So he is quite young in football terms. But will he be seeing himself as saying, right, I'm 26, I see my international teammates down south, both down south and in continental Europe. You know, one of his teammates, his Japanese teammates, just signed for Bayern Munich yesterday from Stuttgart. So those avenues are there. I think it's Ito that signed for Bayern Munich yesterday for €30 million. He looks at Mitoma, who's done well at Brighton. Do you think he sees that move as potentially being a reality for him this summer?
He might see it potentially being a reality in his head. He's nowhere near ready for that. I'm going to say something controversial. Don't punch me through the screen, okay? Now, I know you love him as a player. I think Hatate has ability, but see, if he were to leave, I wouldn't exactly be too perturbed, and I'll tell you why. I listened to the manager, and I've had this conversation with my father as well. I think Hatate's distribution is erratic, and it's erratic on the biggest stages. He gave the ball away a lot in the Champions League, and the manager told you near the end of last season why he was taking him off, because he was giving the ball away. Now, you can't have that as one of your linchpins in midfield. It's not a Hatate baiting exercise here. I'm going with what I've seen with my own eyes as well. And I've always picked up on that fact that his distribution could be far better. So people in the comments calling him a luxury player. I think that's maybe harsh because I think he's a talented footballer. But he certainly ain't ready for the Premier League. But if he were to leave Celtic, I agree with Joe. We could replace him a lot easier than we could with Matt O'Reilly. That's my own personal view. If he stays, great. But if he stays, he has to knuckle down. He has to protect that football at all times and be the player that Brendan Rodgers clearly sees, but also the player that infuriates the life out of the manager. You know, because when he's on it. He had a great first half at Ibrox when Celtic went 2-0 up, just coming back from injury. Everyone went, Hatate's back. But then reverted to type, didn't he, in the games that followed. And, we know he's got an eye for a pass. We know he plays with his head up forward. But I think they're too few and far between. They're sporadic at times with Hatate. And he can be excellent at times, but there are other times where he can be rendered ineffective when you shut him down and you don't give him any room. And, and I just think that Brendan Rodgers is projecting forward and thinking about European football here. He needs players that can, be impactful in Europe. And I think Bernardo was more impactful in Europe than Hatate. You can argue the toss over that, And as I say, I'm just going with what I'm seeing. I like Hatate as a player. I think there's ability there, real ability, but I still think that because he's only came into senior football late in the day, that he is playing catch up. And if he thinks that he's a Premier League player or a Bundesliga player or a Spanish La Liga player, then fine. I just think the proof's in the pudding, and I don't see lots of links with Hatate with other clubs at this moment in time, because I don't think people are willing to shell out those high figure sums for someone like Hatate at this moment in time. And I think he could benefit with staying with Celtic for another year, but he has to play and he has to contribute a lot more. I know injuries played their part last season, and that will have frustrated him more than anything.
Yeah, I was wondering if you were going to make the point that I was going to make, and you did, and I'm glad that you did, because I was going to ask Joe the same thing. Do you think that the lack of first team football, or the lack of playing first team football throughout his career, and the late start that he's had, is a byproduct of the reason why he is maybe a bit immature on the ball? I know one person's liability is another person's risk taker. I get that, and I totally agree with that. He takes risks, but I also think that he's a facilitator as well. And Matt O'Reilly got markedly better when Hatate came back into the side. So I think it's both. I think both sides are right there. Do you agree with that, Joe?
Yeah, that was the only point I was going to make, that when Hatate came back in, especially Matt O'Reilly, it felt like he brought them on, and he feels like that kind of player when the players around him, certainly in the final third, are making runs and making moves on the pitch and try to push that back line that they wouldn't necessarily be if he wasn't there, because they can tell his vision and his ability to pass. But equally, yeah, I remember the manager saying, I think it was actually when he was talking about James Forrest's ball retention when he came back in, might have been after the semi-final perhaps. Obviously, when he's come on and got his goal, James Forrest, but I think he said he wasn't speaking about anyone specifically, but he was just kind of bemoaning creative players that were losing the ball, getting caught in possession, and how difficult that can make it for the back line, and it puts us under unnecessary pressure. I suppose when Hatate's losing the ball, it obviously puts him in that position. But I would love to see him stay. I think there's still more to come. But yeah, I suppose he's one of the ones in the summer where there's a big question mark over his head. It really just reflects what he wants to do. I'd love to see him stay, but if he goes, it's one of those ones where that's the nature of the transfer window, isn't it?
Yeah. And as for Matt O'Reilly, I'm at the what will be stage with Matt O'Reilly. It's a case of that's a job, isn't it? If he goes, he goes with everybody's blessing, doesn't he? If he stays, we're all as high as a kite. I
can't see anyone being frustrated with him going. I mean, obviously, whenever anyone leaves Celtic, there is that element of, don't let the door hit you in the way out kind of thing. But he's just been so open. That's what I was saying earlier about all of his options, and nothing really seems to faze him. Against Rangers, he misses a penalty and is still receiving his flowers because he deserves it. Everything he just seems to take in his stride, and that's applied to the kind of transfer furore as well. He just seems to be really level-headed, and for such a young person to be so mature about it, and having contributed so much last year to win all the awards at club level, I don't think anyone would really wish him ill in that regard.
Celtic have got them both signed up to long-term deals, so the ball is very much in their court. If they want to sell, they'll be asking for a good fee. That's good business from Celtic. Speaking of good business for Celtic, we'll go on to the forwards and cover them quite quickly. It looks as if will be joining Genk in the Belgian league for £4.2 million up front, plus bonuses. Tony, not bad for a player that was your third choice striker in the second half of the season that just wasn't getting game time whatsoever. Do I think that that's a good move for the club? Yes, but I also think that he could come alive in Belgium? Because admittedly, I've seen lesser players do well in Belgium. I make the point of Bayo. I didn't think Bayo was a great striker for Celtic. He went to, was it Charleroi? Or Charleroi, and he started scoring goals, which allowed him to move on in his career. I think he went to France, and now he's at Watford currently. So he's made a career for himself. But what do you make of this deal? £4 million? Are you happy with the money, or would you want him to stick around and fight for his place?
I tell you where I am with it. I'm perfectly happy with it. I think it's a good deal, and if he goes to Belgium, I don't care what happens to him. If he reinvents himself at Belgium, because he ain't a Celtic player. Well, fine, great, we'll take it. But if he's not playing for Celtic, I really don't care. I've got to be honest. So he's had a chance at Celtic. I just don't feel he's taken it or grasped it. And if you get £4 million, it's £4 million you could put towards the purchase of Adam Ida, isn't it? Let's be realistic here.
Or Bojan Miovski.
Either or someone of repute that you want to do the job that the guy who's leaving has been offloaded was meant to do. You thought he would do, didn't do, or sporadically did it. So, you know what? I'm quite au fait with going, because we spoke yesterday and I don't know, he failed to convince, didn't he? There was times you looked and you thought there's something there, but you didn't look at him the way you looked at Adam Ida or Majowski, did you? And think it could be, you both think that either or of them are great fits for Celtic, but you think particularly Adam Ida, he was the striker that always meant to be, wasn't he? Let's be honest.
It was a hybrid between Kyogo and
he was brought in for that reason, to perform that role, and he didn't do it. So 4.2 million, if that's the case and Celtic want to conclude a quick bit of business, go and do it, but then use that to go and purchase Adam Ida then, if that's the thinking.
Joe, do you subscribe to that 4.2 million in order to fund a Kyogo competitor?
Yeah, and looking from the player's perspective as well, as you mentioned, drops down the pecking order. My only concern is that we don't have Adam Ida just now. He is a Norwich player. It was a funny one for me, because from what I saw, I was impressed. And Ange Postecoglou, when he brought him in, he seemed really impressed to have got the deal over the line. More than most of the signings he made, he was
quite giddy.
Yeah, he seemed like he was, and I saw him in the first few games and I maybe wasn't personally too sure myself, but faith in the manager at the time, he seemed really, really happy to get him in. It's funny because I don't claim to be, a master of the analysis and analytics which are so prevalent in modern football. But I was reading Alan Morrison; his contributions are phenomenal, and I would rather trust someone who knows what they're talking about more than me. And he made a comparison. I think it might have been in May between O and Ida in terms of what they contribute, and there wasn't too much between them. But with the eye test, Ida certainly felt more of a Celtic player. The big moments, obviously, they kind of belie the stats a little bit, because the big moments are more than just the numbers. I would, if I had to choose between the two, it would be Adam Ida for me. But again, if we're talking about competition for places and reinforcing the team, that only makes sense to me if we have Adam Ida or we have Miovski or we have someone else in that position. However, the 4.5 million in modern football in terms of what we can expect at Celtic and being realistic in a transfer window seems like good business. And if he's not happy to be on the bench and maybe not getting as much minutes as he wants, then it makes sense for both parties, in my opinion.
Yeah, let's hope that he has
impending. That's when I feel that the analytics and stats can be skewed.
It's 50-50 for me.
You look at the optics. You know what you're watching, right? And I love Alan Morrison's contributions as well, because you learn stuff.
Yeah.
But on a optics level, you know what you're watching, and I always say to people, that's what's more important than anything else.
Yeah.
Nobody can tell you what you're watching. They can maybe paint a picture and show you statistical analysis, but they can't tell you what you're watching.
And I think that's why
that's the way I approach it.
Yeah, with full credit to Celtic last season, like that last stretch was phenomenal. Yeah. And I know that the manager was rightly upset about external narratives and things, but there was a point in the season where the football that we saw, even at Celtic Park, wasn't what we saw at Rugby Park. Do you know what I mean? That at Rugby Park, the last game was phenomenal. That was the eye test. That was a Brendan Rodgers team playing like a Brendan Rodgers team. So we were still getting the points before, and there was that lull. it was tangible, the difference. That rugby part of
Yeah.
football was the best I'd seen it all year, and I think most Celtic fans can say that. So
and that's what the manager thinks he
Mhm.
can reproduce in the Champions League level,
100%, and
right? With better quality players.
Yeah.
And he was purring that night because we sat and spoke to him, Ryan, didn't we, after the game? And I asked him, was that the best team performance in over both your spells? And he said, arguably it was, and it was.
Yeah.
So I think he was thinking, right, if I can get this guy in to lead the line, I can bring in more quality players in the various positions we all know need freshened up. Then I think he really glimpsed the future that night and thought, if they can do that in that surface, they can do it. And I'm all for, you have to say, you take into account the opposition. I'm just talking about the actual style and the way they played that night.
Against a good team who was consistent all year, and really punched above their weight. Manager gets manager of the year. It was all told. It was perfect almost.
And at full time, when we were in the press conference room or the press room, Derek McInnes held his hands up and said they would have beaten any team tonight with the way that they played. He was like, we could do nothing about that. We were simply the other team in Celtic's dominating performance. So I think we've seen a glimpse of what Celtic can be. You're just hoping that the board can back Rodgers to bring in or facilitate the moves that he needs to take them to that level more consistently. Kyogo, there's been talk, maybe whispers that Kyogo might move on in the summer. I don't think anybody in this panel wants that to happen. He's got to stay. First of all, I don't think there's that much value in him just due to his age. If he was going somewhere, then I'd expect him to go to Japan. I think that ship has sailed in terms of making the next European move. So if he was going somewhere, then he would probably go back to Japan. And I know there is some money floating about here and there. Urawa Red Diamonds are quite a rich club in the J League, but I think Kyogo's far better staying where he is. And maybe he's had that acclimatisation to Rodgers' style, and next season he can have the breakout once again in a new style.
Yeah,
that's just to anybody. Sorry.
I think he was playing in a completely different system, and I know he took some criticism for not being as prolific, but he still scored a lot of goals last year. And I said this before, he's still the best striker in the country. That's when he's on form, when he is that. He's playing as that penalty box striker. He's getting himself involved, unsettling backlines, and in Europe that could be absolutely crucial. No, I mean, as long as he's happy here, I want him to stay for more than the foreseeable future. Personally,
I think he needs someone like Adam Ida or a Bojan Majorski to come in and take his levels up again. So I think there was an over-reliance in Kyogo last year when it wasn't working and playing him through the, you react to that in two ways, don't you? You let them play through the malaise, see if they can score and take themselves out of it. And, he got a lot of criticism and unjustly, but I was also making the point that, you need other options because it wasn't working at a time with Kyogo. He was still making the runs, but the service to him was poor, wasn't it? From the wide areas. That's a huge part of his game. Whereas Adam Ida come in, and we've spoken about playing with your back to goal, holding it up, running channels, playing guys in, linking up play, right? Kyogo can do that, but it's not his fault. It's not his natural game. So you saw him pick the ball up with his back to goal, and his immediate thoughts were turning and trying to get a shot off, and sometimes that ended up with him smashing it off the first defender, and people getting really disgruntled and frustrated with him. But it's just the way he thinks. He plays with his eye facing towards the goal. So if you're putting the ball in front of him, then there's no reason for him not to be there to stick it in. And how many goals of the goals that he scored for Celtic have been the trademark near post run? It's impossible to defend against when you get it right. And he's a predator there. That's what he does. And I think there was an over-reliance on him last year, and also the fact that he was getting used to Rodgers, and Rodgers said that he didn't ask him to do anything different. You have to sort of say, well, you kind of did. You were asking him to link the play and stuff like that. And, the goal he scored against St Mirren, win the ball back, give it to Hatate, make that run, Hatate finds him. Kyogo, that was not part of Kyogo's game when he first arrived. He's added it, which is great, and which is an asset moving forward, and kind of learning how to play in a Rodgers team now. And again, I go back to it's horses for courses. Rodgers is going to be a horses for courses manager next season. And a large part of it will be playing with a big guy up front, a big focal point. And that chat will be had with Kyogo. I'll need you for a lot of games. There's 8 Champions League games now. There's Rangers games where Kyogo comes alive. Kyogo's a big game player, comes alive in it. So for those very reasons, that's why he should stay. But you just have to understand that he's not going to play in every game. He's going to have to understand that too, whoever comes in, because he wants a focal point striker. But again, I think that will bring the best out of Kyogo. And he is still the best striker in the country. So whoever comes in, if they want to be the best striker in the country, they're going to have to go something to beat Kyogo, aren't they? Which I like, because then that means, somebody's going to have to come and say, right, okay, let's do this together, and be good for each other. And if I'm a manager, that's the way I'm thinking. It has to be.
Yeah. I know I'm stating the obvious, and I'm not saying anything new here, but if it's to kind of regurgitate some of the narrative, if it's a disappointing season for Kyogo, apart from the number of goals he scored, the 2 goals against Rangers, the one in September at Ibrox that he takes early, and the one at Celtic Park in December, are 2 of the best Glasgow Derby goals I think that I've ever seen, just in terms of the way they come across. So if you have a season that's disappointing and score 2 of those massive goals in massive games, that's okay for me. Do you know what I mean? And he contributes so much more than that, but just to, those are 2 of the best goals I've seen against Rangers in the whole time I've been supporting Celtic. And I was there for the 6-2 chip and everything. So it's a no-brainer.
Just going on to the wingers quickly, I think we can all assume that Rocco Vata's future is elsewhere. I know there's been a deal on the table, but the fact that it's June and he's not signed a new deal would indicate that he will be moving, possibly to Italy or wherever, but I think his future lies elsewhere. I think he cut a bit of a reserved figure in the title celebrations too, so maybe a good best of luck to him. Obviously if he signs a new deal, then great. Celtic have managed to retain one of the brightest prospects, one of Ireland's brightest prospects too, but I think we all see his future being elsewhere. Same probably goes for Marco Tilio. I know he's been out on loan at Melbourne City. Perhaps we can ask Hamish how he's been getting on, but when you hear about a loan deal and you hear about players going on loan, you want to see clips, you want to see goals happening, you want to see contributions happening. I know he scored quite early on. It was a great goal that he scored early on, but I've not really heard too much from him since. I think he's had his injuries though as well. So Tilio, bit of a weird one if you're asking me. Two appearances. I remember one was a bit longer than the other one, but they were both off the bench. Not great. Bit of a. He's not much of a physical specimen, which I think you need in the Scottish League. Look at Daizen Maeda. I know he's short, but he's physical, and that's the difference. Speaking of Daizen Maeda, I don't think we've got anything to speak about, to be honest, considering Daizen Maeda is one of the first names on the team sheet. Going to be important in Europe next season, isn't he?
Do you know the irony about Daizen Maeda having had a slight pop at his fellow countrymen for his distribution being erratic? Nobody's more erratic than Daizen Maeda. Yeah, he's a cult figure at the club, isn't he? He just gets away with it because it's just Daizen Maeda. I mean, he runs about. It's ridiculous, you know what I mean? Because any other player would be getting it tight and from all angles, but he really has kind of ingratiated himself into becoming a fans cult icon and a hero. Because his crossing's murder. It's weird. It really is. Sometimes it's that great. I mean, I love quoting Bill Shankly, but I think Bill Shankly, when they signed Tony Haley, which was Mark Haley's old man, for $100,000 or something, and he called him over after the first training session and said to him, "Here, big man, have you ever seen a ball before? I mean, I've just paid $100,000 for you." I mean, it's just like, show me what you've got, that kind of thing. And at times you look at Daizen Maeda and you think to yourself, have you ever seen a football before? What are you doing? And then there's other things you just marvel at something because, and I think the Celtic supporters love that uncertainty with Maeda, don't they? It's that he's the Forrest Gump, as I've said before. He's every performance is like a box of chocolates. You just don't know what you're going to get, and you kind of, it excites you a bit, doesn't it? And as Joe was talking about that goal he scored against Rangers, 23 seconds? You just think, over. I mean, if a goal ever was microcosmic of your Celtic career, it's that one, isn't it?
But it's why I took real issue with people saying that it was luck, and of course it was luck in terms of the direction of the ball, but only he forces that luck.
Yeah.
Only his style of play, that incessant snapping at your heels, chasing James Tavernier down. Like, yeah, he gets lucky with the way that the ball goes, but he deserves it because he forced it. And that's
but the Ibrox before, he robbed Tavernier. Remember when Morelos passed? He's robbed Tavernier and put it in like a good old-fashioned striker, and you say to yourself, my goodness, if you could get everything together, you would have a wonderful footballer in Maida. But he is the sum of parts, isn't he? He's a machine. He run about all day. He's crossing here, there, and everywhere. But but the Celtic supporters just love what he brings. And Annette, again, another one who's one of the most popular, if not the most popular teammate in that dressing room, and a great person to have around. And you can't get enough great people, good players in your team, because you become a good team. Then it stands to reason, doesn't it? And but yeah, he brings a lot to the table, doesn't he? You wouldn't dream of letting Dyson Maida go just for everything that he brings. Mistakes as well,
I think his defensive work rate. I think his defensive work rate is the reason why Dyson Maida is a first pick, and maybe the likes of, I don't want to be the whipping boy, or I don't want him to be the whipping boy, but maybe Mikey Johnson isn't in that same position. I think the two of them are quite erratic on the ball. I would actually go as far to say that Mikey Johnson is more talented on the ball, but what you get defensively from Dyson Maida sets him apart from everybody else. It's thankless, but he does get his flowers as well, and that goal at Ibrox, encompasses that. It shows that it's worth doing, because you make your own luck in that situation. He made his own luck. He closed down Tavernier, whatever Tavernier does in the summer. I know there's been links with Saudi Arabia. I think he'll be glad to see the back of Maida, because it's been his worst nightmare. I wrote about it. I think it was February or March time before the game at Ibrox, and I said that Tavernier is spooked by Maida, and it's true. It was shown, because he's just a nightmare. He's on his case 24/7.
If Tavernier goes to Saudi Arabia, it'd be worth just writing the Dyson Maida to Saudi Arabia link, wouldn't it? Just for a laugh. You know what I mean?
Would you be surprised?
Whatever club he
He's
goes
that
to,
focused
just
on
link him with a rival. It's just the whole spook nature of it.
He wouldn't even need to fly. He could just run it, to be honest. Because he gets injured and then he comes back a month later. He was out for the rest of the season. He's already on the next season, and he's back from his injury. Just that. It's a remarkable.
To talk a lot about the press, that signature high press and that high intensity and the counter press that he's always talking about. And Maida, just the way he's able to instigate all of that is that work rate. And yeah, I agree, Tony. There is real inconsistencies in his game all over the pitch.
That's the beauty of it, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. He is one of the first picks on the team sheet, and deservedly so for me. The way that he can apply what Brendan Rodgers wants to do, both in defence and attack, is second to none. And I was saying this to you last week, Riley. I would love to see that being the standard if Celtic are bringing in, wingers or forward players. I don't know that there is anyone that can play in that same style with that intensity, but nevertheless, it should be what other players are looking at and going, that's the work rate, and I'm sure that pushes them on the training pitch as well.
And I know I've slagged his crossing, but he didn't miss his cross when it mattered. Remember for Jota at Hampden, that was one of the best crosses I've seen for. As it's now
in terms of reactions, is that not him as well? Obviously, the collapse in that moment, complacency. That the first player on it's Dyson Maida, and that's no
Across the Forest at Rugby Park was a good one too. So it shows that there is improvements in his game. Listen, I know we've been going for 58 minutes, so I'm just going to sort of streamline the rest of the players, sort of a keep or sell basis. Another contentious one, Lewis Palmer. It's got to be for me. Give him a pre-season. I'll let Tony take the floor with Lewis Palmer.
I think like everything else, there's something there, isn't there? He just really annoyed me.
Numbers, yeah, absolutely.
And Alan Morrison would make the case for him perfectly. I'm going with my optics on it, and he just really got under my skin with the double penalty miss. And I think it was just the sheer brazenness of trying to take the same one again, and having just gone against everything that he did before that when he battered the penalties into the corner, it really got to me, because I just thought it was really, really lackadaisical, and I just don't want to see that in a Celtic player at all. And I don't want the kind of Tony. And I don't want the keep sell low. And I just don't want that attitude to permeate through the club. That kind of attitude's acceptable. It wasn't acceptable. It was a vital miss. And I don't think he really recovers from that, actually, because he was very wayward up and down after that. And I know you like him, Ryan, and you always tell me about his stats and his contributions, and I get that, but I want to see more. I really do. I think he's very selfish. He plays for himself. I think if the one thing he'll have realised with all the celebrations is Celtic are a family, they're a team, they're a unit, and you're either part of it or you're not. So there are times when he was on the park where I felt he was very selfish. Could have played other teammates in just by looking up, and that's what marks out the ordinary players from the great players. You know what I mean? You can be decent, but see when you see the picture, the whole picture, and you become a team player, and you accept that an assist is as good as a goal. It doesn't have to always be about you. Then I think when you embrace that, and I just think Palmer took a while to embrace that. He was front, back and centre of all the celebrations, and I would conjecture that maybe a wee bit more like Thiago Holm, you made a contribution, but you didn't make the stellar contribution that your celebration certainly thought you did. You know what I mean? So I would like to see him get similar figures next season, but make a more valid contribution. That's all I'm saying.
I think the opening stretch of last season showed me enough to, if he can just maintain a bit more consistency, that's short and sharp for me.
His goals and assist numbers are quite good too. If he kept it up for the full season, I know he didn't, and that's the reason why we're having this conversation. If he did, he'd be Celtic's player of the season. From that stretch, 10 goals. I think it was 10 goals he scored, and it was double digits in assists too. If he keeps it up for the whole season, his numbers would have been incredible. But
I'm not doubting he's got ability, Ryan. He just,
I think a pre-season could be the difference for him.
He just hit a comfort zone, I think. After
I totally agree with that. Totally.
So, but I think he's shown enough. I agree with Manchester Boggin there. He's shown enough to want another chance, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely. Nicholas Kuhn, just through the door. I would say that he's still got another. There was contributing factors as to why he didn't have a good start to his Celtic career with the weight loss due to his dental surgery. So is that just another keep, guys, for next season?
I think so. Yeah, I think he said himself about match fitness and getting himself up to speed, and that was as early as the cup semi-final. So yeah, I think a wee bit more time.
I would persevere.
Yeah. Yang, was that a loan deal? Would you agree? Maybe a loan deal somewhere where he's playing every single week for a club rather than in and out. And in some of those sub appearances, he was really quite poor. I know there was some games he looked good, particularly against Aberdeen, the 6-0 game. But I would also caveat with the fact that Aberdeen were dreadful that day. They were absolutely hopeless. A loan for Yang?
I think so. Yeah.
A loan.
Yeah.
A loan to a Scottish team, though.
Yeah.
Got to be, because I think if you send them to South Korea, you're not getting a closer look at them. I think that's every position we've now covered. We've got there. It's been an hour and 3 minutes where we've managed to talk about the midfield and attack, but there's plenty of players. We've also got guys like Ben Summers, who maybe wants another loan deal. Matthew Anderson, there'll be an article about him next week from Stuart Ross on how he's done at Admiravaka. Trying to think if there's anybody else that we've missed. Johnny Kenny, who's still at the club. And then I needed to remind myself that he was still at the club. Didn't mention Dane Murray yesterday, who signed a new deal too. So there's players in and around the team that will be wanting to make a difference in pre-season. Hopefully pre-season can be a beneficial time for those players to really make the grade if they haven't done so already. Guys, is there anything else you want to speak about before we head off today's show? I know it's been a bit of a bumper one.
No, I just want to say good luck to Scotland and the Celtic contingent that are playing tonight. Here's hoping they can get the country off to a flyer. We'll all be tuning in for that, won't we? So
absolutely. Yeah, I think everybody's going to be tuning in for that, to be honest. It's exciting. There'll be Celtic. There'll be a Celtic contingent definitely starting the game. I would say that Ralston will start. I think McGregor's probably the first name on the team sheet. I think he's Scotland's, not to be a bit biased, but I think he's Scotland's most important player in the midfield. I think
you are biased. Come on, accept it.
Yeah. And then get James Forrest on the bench too, and Greg Taylor. I don't think either of them will start, but they might have a part to play later on in the game, especially defensively, if they're looking for maturity. But good luck to Steve Clarke and the Scotland team tonight. We're looking forward to 8 o'clock kickoff for anybody that doesn't know when it's kicking off, although I think everybody knows that by now. I think we'll all be watching. Looking forward to that. Looking forward to being back on the show on Monday. Joe, thanks as always for coming on. Really do appreciate it. You've analysed the whole team. How are you feeling? You feeling good about that?
Yeah, I'm going to go for a lie down now. No, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure, and I'll hopefully make some more cameo appearances over the course.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely will be the case. Tony, happy with that? Happy with your team? Happy with your picks?
Oh, aye. You've got to stand by what you've said. You know, you can't come out here and bump your gums and then go against it. So yeah, we're always listen. It's what we do. You know, people can give their opinion as well. You don't have to agree, but I'm certainly I just hoping you just want them to add that sprinkling of quality, don't you? And you hope that starts soon. And you've written about this morning ahead of recruitment. You could argue, do we need a head of recruitment if it's Brendan Rodgers? It's all over that. But you just need to be told these things or get some indication that isn't the case, isn't it? So we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. Thank you very much to our sponsors, MPH Group. If you check out their showroom in Dunfermline, the links will be in the description shortly after this video. www.celticway.co.uk/subscribe. £4 for 4 months. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel and keep this growing community growing even more so. Thank you to everybody. We'll be back on Monday at 10 a.m. to discuss everything that's happened over the weekends. Hopefully a couple more links to players too, maybe ahead of recruitment as well. Who knows? We'll see you on Monday, guys. Enjoy the rest of your weekend and all the best to Scotland tonight. Hopefully they do the business.